Eat the Rich 2019.
We're back, baby. Yeah, the holidays. The holidays happened. Wow, what a holiday. Anyway, moving on. Enough said.
I don't know if it's like, I think it's like stress, but like I've eaten more Tums this last month than I have in maybe my entire lifetime.
Dude, you know what I think it might be? And this is, I'm just sort of spitballing here, but have you noticed fewer people are saying Merry Christmas?
That's it.
And that kind of gets me really anxious about a lot of things. I feel like I'm not.
There's a high correlation between saying Merry Christmas and gastroesophageal reflux disease.
That's true.
Every time somebody says Happy Holidays to me, my insides just become a hot liquid soup, and I immediately have to use the bathroom.
That's we do know Trump has a great stomach. His diet is remarkable.
Oh my god.
Iron cast stomach.
Oh my god.
No, cast iron. Whatever.
Just the roiling anger, I think, plays a bit of a role. And
well, let's not jump to conclusions here.
Well, dude, that was the thing that I woke up to today, and like I was tweeting about some eco anxiety and stuff, and whoever runs the Eat the Rich pod posted about this, which was about that animation of the Arctic Circle.
Oh, yeah.
And the receding ice, and that caused a bit of agita.
It's bad. Yeah, that's a horrifying graphic. To be honest with you, there's nothing good about that at all.
The one good thing about the melting polar ice caps is that's going to open up more opportunities to drill, baby. Come on.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's something I wanted to chat about, because like something I learned recently from a friend of the show was about how the imperial powers of the world, like the US, parts of Europe, China, Russia, etc., they're looking at the melting Arctic as a geopolitical opportunity.
Yeah, of course.
What's going on with China specifically, which is really interesting, is that Chinese spies, essentially spies, will pose as tourists going to extreme northern remote villages in like Canada and like Greenland and Norway, Alaska, and basically are gathering intel. And basically they come up to talk to these mainly indigenous communities with like a handle of vodka, because there's no alcohol up there, and ingratiate themselves to say like, hey, have you seen any military activity up here? Have you seen any vessels? What have you seen going on up here in the Arctic?
Oh my God.
Wow.
And not to mention too, what's interesting is that like some of the reasons that indigenous people up north are like happy to talk is that they don't have any allegiance to the country that claims their land.
Yeah, right. Of course.
Because why would they?
Yeah.
All of their ports are being eroded by climate change. Now that the ice has receded and there's like waves that are lapping up against the land and the ports, and indigenous communities aren't getting any help from these governments or infrastructure or healthcare, whatever. And China is trying to claim now that they're an Arctic country.
Yeah, for sure. And
look
at a map. Look at a map.
Well, they put out in January of last year, in 2018, they put out an official Arctic policy paper asserting that they want to create what they call a polar Silk Road.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the shipping lanes.
That's good naming though.
And they vow to like actively participate in Arctic affairs as a quote near Arctic state.
Damn.
As a major stakeholder in the Arctic, and they're putting military capabilities, and they want to extend that to the Arctic region. I should mention that near Arctic isn't a fucking thing. It's just their way to push their way to the table.
I mean, technically everybody is near the Arctic, right?
Yeah, well,
like on the grand scale of things. What I like about the prospect of the sort of polar ice caps melting, opening up shipping lanes, and potentially like you were saying, Dwight, this kind of like imperial great game that will inevitably, if not to an all-out war, will involve some kind of like minor skirmishes and stuff in these remote parts of the north. What I like about that idea is it will make the war on Christmas real. Because it will involve like just giant fucking like aircraft carriers being pushed through, breaking ice as it goes through to like fucking drone strike Santa's workshop or whatever.
Yes.
Well, yeah, this was something, was it earlier this year? Mike Pompeo was talking about at a big international meeting about the sort of future for the Arctic is. And he had sort of, I think that there's like a lot of people are talking about this stuff behind closed doors or whatever. Like there's, again, like you're talking about spycraft, right? But there was this sort of unwritten rule, you don't talk about it in public yet. And he just fucking went right through and was like, no, we're interested in exploring oil possibilities and fossil fuels in the Arctic. We're hoping that they warm up, that way we can get in there and whatever. Looking at military opportunities, and it caused like a bit of some controversy in the sort of diplomatic community, but because it's horrifying. But I think it would be silly to assume that was not part of the plan for a lot of these like major world powers going back decades. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, now I'm really thinking about it. I mean, imagine like how awful it will be inevitably when like, you know, soldiers are dying over the polar ice caps. Like it will happen at some point, probably.
Yeah.
And imagine like the stupid like military propaganda that will come out about it. Because, you know, basically for the entirety of the last 20 years of the global war on terror, all of the military propaganda and like imagery all centers around, you know, like everybody's wearing like khaki and it's in, you know, vague Middle Eastern settings or whatever. Like they're gonna have like everybody's gonna be in like snow camo.
They'd just be Hoth, dude.
Yeah. Oh my God, they're totally gonna do it. Like come fight like it's Star Wars.
Yeah, dude, exactly. Fuck, I didn't think about that. Oh, that's
just
horrifying.
Literally dressed as stormtroopers in all white. Like marching across the fucking the endless wastes of
the tundra.
Yeah.
Dude, by that time they're gonna do like a cross promotion with Disney for like they're just going to make literal stormtrooper fatigues.
It's not far-fetched. I mean, they did it with a bunch of the superhero companies.
I keep seeing interviews where they ask cast members or fans, like this is promotional materials where they're like, oh, like, if you could choose to be a member of the Resistance or the First Order, which would you choose? And it's like,
oh my
but
God.
that one of those is actually like a fascist government stand-in. So why are we, I mean, or at least as far as we can tell, I mean.
Yeah.
I want to just mention this too, because I found when you were mentioning that, Adam, about Secretary Pompeo, there was a article that I was reading earlier in the New York Times called "The Latest Arena for China's Growing Global Ambitions, the Arctic," which came out in May of this year, and they talk about just like how they use their economics, their comparative advantage to get into the Arctic, and this one fucking blew my mind. 6 years ago, China struck a free trade deal with Iceland.
Nice.
Giving tiny Iceland a giant market for one of its main exports, fish. And a Chinese company proposed to partner with Greenland, rebuilding airports, prompting Denmark to step in and underwrite the project instead. Another Chinese company proposed to build a port for Sweden, but backed out amid fraying diplomatic relations between the two countries.
That's weird.
Yeah, look, this is going to lead to something.
Yeah,
Right,
for sure.
The moves are being made, right?
I mean,
I didn't hear about any of that. That sucks.
I mean, that's one of the things that is not often part of the climate change discussion, but is probably going to be one of the more immediate impacts that is felt as the topography of the world changes as a result of, you know, either, you know, in some places increased sea levels, or in other places, you know, like just the climate literally changing from, I mean, one of the things I think about a lot is that you have, you know, a lot of Southeast Asia and South Asia in particular, like the Indian subcontinent, you know, there's a lot of projections that, you know, within a relatively short amount of time, a great amount of those areas will no longer be habitable because of rising sea levels. And simultaneous to that, you have like the entire Russian heartland, the hinterland of Russia, you know, like basically the Siberian wastes, which are mostly uninhabited because of, you know, the climate there, and because there's no like real strong development there except for a few enclaves. And so like simultaneously, you're going to have one of the most densely packed places in the world become like greatly uninhabitable, which is going to cause like a you know, potentially millions, if not hundreds of millions of refugees. And you're going to have one of the largest land masses on Earth suddenly become habitable.
Oh,
like
dude.
that's going to those two things are going to be related. And if we look at how governments of the world right now are handling like refugees in a, you know, a fascistic sort of way, can you imagine when it's going to be, you know, the scale of that is, you know, 10 to 100 times higher. Like, what is the Russian government gonna do when, like, you know, 10 million people show up at its doorstep and just start crossing into, like, Siberia and shit to settle?
I don't know if there's any historical precedent for what it's like to try to invade Russia. I don't know. don't know if we have
Well,
any
the thing
history
is,
buffs here.
but they're not going to have the Russian winter anymore. There you go. So actually,
geez,
it's
that
going to
is
be
so
open
fucked
season,
up, Shane.
and that is the Cold War dream. We could finally do a mainland invasion of the goddamn Ruskies.
And just to go back to India, there's two things about it that I've been thinking about recently. One is in Chennai. Basically, there's no water in Chennai as a result of just companies overusing it and siphoning it off and stuff, and then just straight up climate change. And it's basically the water wars are existing in Chennai right now because these sort of private deliveries of water will come, and it's just this mob scene to try to get it because it's extremely fucking desperate. So that's already happening. And then secondly, what's going on with the Citizenship Act in India? A bunch of people weirdly were like tagging a bunch of like news organizations like BBC and NPR and Al Jazeera and shit and Eat the Rich Pod and like bringing it to our attention of what's going on in Uttar Pradesh. But there's fucking legit like fascist gangs that are roaming the streets like in uniforms.
I saw a video of that.
Yeah, it's really fucking intense. I mean, we start to wonder like what austerity and desperation and reduction in resources brings. It's fascism. That's what happens. And that's what we're seeing in India right now. Not to mention they already have like a far right prime minister regardless.
Yeah.
So happy holidays.
Well, it's obviously in the water crisis in India is much different than it is anywhere in the US, I think. But that's one of the things that comes up when you look into fracking stuff is requires like a pretty significant amount of water. And a lot of times they'll just pull it from like local aquifers and stuff, which are in the short term, they're not really, in a lot of areas, they're not renewable on a short term scale. Yeah. And so, like in North Dakota, for example, they'll pull from local water sources in the local water table to frack, which is an extremely like short-term solution to a problem. I mean, if you even would call it a problem of energy production or whatever. But those are reservoirs and stuff that are not going to refill in anybody's lifetime currently, and so they're not at the point now where they've drawn. They're not yet there at the point where they've drawn so much that they don't have any water left. But certainly, if you continue at this pace, in a couple decades, you could certainly be facing a situation in which places on the plains that don't get a ton of rainfall are going to be looking at some pretty desperate circumstances.
Pretty bleak.
Why don't you just drink the fracked water? Why don't you just frack for water? More aquifers exist under the crust of the earth, and if only we fracked them, we could get the water our bodies so desperately need.
This is not as silly as some of the stuff, the solutions I've seen.
I don't know if it's been tried yet, but certainly something we could look into, perhaps.
It's a practical solution for a practical world. Water cup.
Yeah.
There's a non-zero chance that in the next 2 weeks Elon Musk tweets that out.
I knew it.
I
knew it.
We're going to
proposed
dig
tunnels
underground
today,
tunnels.
dude.
Yeah, what a fucking idiot.
He's really on one.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like there's been like just an increase of anger over the last week of just seeing just how people are dealing with the holidays and just watching. I think it was like Ralph on JK I'm Fine podcast that was talking about what it's like in Australia with the fires right now.
Yeah. We didn't even talk about how an entire continent is literally on fire.
Just on fire.
It's just on fire.
It's just on fire. It's really fucking spooky, man. Dude, I read this morning that 1/3 of koalas in Australia around Sydney were fucking just instant barbecued.
Holy shit.
1/3.
Throw another koala on the barbie. I'm really sorry I said that. Immediately really sorry I said that. I'm a friend to all koalas. I love the koalas.
Fucking die.
Oh, God. Man. Wow.
We could just frack for more koalas, too. I'm sure there are some hiding in the Earth's crust. All we need to do is drill, and then we can get that sweet, sweet koala meat.
That's right. Man, I didn't see that statistic. That is fucking ruthless.
Yes, it's really fucking bad. So, yeah, I'm just like, I don't know. We'll talk about it later in the program because I really kind of want to do like a little kind of retrospective of the year. But, I think I've got the fire in me. We've all got the fire in us right now.
It's funny because times like this when we're talking about it with this global perspective and we see the simultaneous rise of increased increased difficulties and problems of massive scales due to climate change and, capitalist austerity. And then kind of global response to that in a number of places seems to be an increase of like right-wing authoritarianism, if not outright fascism, to kind of like manage the crisis. And it really makes me think about Thomas Friedman's The World is Flat, the book about globalization.
Friend of the show, Thomas Friedman.
and maybe he was right that the world was flat, but it's because it's been flattened by fucking, capitalist crashes and eventually like nuclear holocaust. And so there's no more buildings, there's no more mountains because we fracked them all.
It's like Fukuyama's The End of History. It's like, well, he was wrong unless it was a threat.
Right, exactly. Like history is going to end because there won't be any more people to write it.
Right.
Yeah. So happy holidays, everybody. I hope you enjoyed time with your loved ones.
Enjoy it while you can.
Yeah. I hope you enjoyed your last holiday.
Oh God.
That when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. Chris is interned in a safe house, in a roasting house in Seattle at Starbucks headquarters. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it right now. He is completely indisposed. He will return next week once we break him out.
Chris, if you're listening to this, blink once if you're okay. We're not going to see it, so it doesn't really matter, actually. Blink all you want, buddy. You're not getting out of the doghouse.
I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Ho, ho, ho.
Okay. And a friend of the show and freelance writer, Adam Boffa, a.k.a. @Ambinate on Twitter.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on to discuss the film Cats.
I could do like a tight 5 on Cats.
Just
We're
go
good.
on the
We're good.
Go on the Mr. Movies podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Join him, friend of the show, Mr. Movies.
Yeah.
I haven't even seen Star Wars yet, man, and I'm demoralized.
Oh, dude, you gotta see it. It's so bad.
I will.
It's so bad, but it's really funny. Like
exactly.
I was laughing so hard in the theater. I felt bad because there was this when me and Carrie went to go see it. There was this like it's assigned seats in this particular theater, and so when we went to go sit down, there was like these 2 little kids to our right, and then another little kid and his father to our left. And then I realized, during the trailers that like they were all one family, but they just got split up with the seats. And so, I felt bad. So I was like, well, just move over, man. Like, so you can sit with your kids. And he was like really appreciative. So he sits down with his kids, and I figure, like, I don't really get a lot out of these Star Wars sequels. I don't think they're good films, but like, they are kids movies. Maybe they're going to have a nice experience. And just like the first line of the opening title crawl is like a joke. And I started laughing. And the whole movie, I was laughing because it's so stupid. And I started to feel really bad because there were these like little kids next to me who probably, are not perceiving necessarily how bad it is. But like, and I tried to stop my own enjoyment of the awfulness of it to preserve their childlike wonder of the War in the Stars.
Man, I'm seeing you in my mind, Shane, as like De Niro in Cape Fear in the theater, just like laughing, stinking of booze, and vaping.
Yeah, I mean that would be a pretty accurate rendition of most of my film going experiences.
Man. Adam wanted to join us. We wanted to talk a bit about fracking, a very specific guy that we want to talk about, and just like oil and gas in general, because on the dovetails of the things that we're talking about with climate change, we need to examine the things that are impacting it, most of which is our fossil fuel bound economy. And we want to just kind of explain how this sort of greases the wheels of it. So to kind of cap off this year and cap off the kind of growing anger and resentment from the working class at the causes of climate change, the causes of fascism, the causes of austerity, we really wanted to examine some extra parts of the fossil fuel part of the equation that we haven't really talked about at length on Eat the Rich, and that's why I'm really glad that Adam has agreed to join us to talk about this and one specific gentleman in general. So just started off, I just wanted to give like kind of a quick primer on fracking and geopolitical fossil fuel policy in general. Fracking, aka hydraulic fracturing, is basically the process of injecting a fluid under high pressure into a shale formation to allow room, even if it's a very, very tiny amount of room, for gas to flow up to the surface or through the casing of the well. And it's a shale formation because that's the kind of sedimentary rock that had tended to be formed alongside of this of the natural gas geologically. Now, often the fracking wells aren't wells that were drilled expressly for the extraction of natural gas. They're usually old oil wells that have been, quote, tapped out and capped off from long ago. But when the oil and natural gas prices get high enough, it becomes economical for oil and gas explorers to do a survey of old wells and see if it would be profitable to perform fracking and extract the gas. So about that, the cost, and you know, we talk a lot about on Eat the Rich about companies that look at a cost sheet, do a quick P&L, a profit and loss, to say, you know, at what point do the potential revenue from this business or good or a service outweigh the potential costs involved. And so, you know, if it's in the black, if it's good, then they go for it. The cost of fracking on average is somewhere around $50 a barrel, which is pretty expensive. And as of recording today, for instance, the cost of West Texas Intermediate crude oil is around $61 per barrel. So it's a relatively tight margin if you wanted to kind of substitute the two. But let's think about this geopolitically. The cost of extraction of crude oil in Saudi Arabia is about $9 to $10 per barrel, which is an extremely cheap extraction. And, you know, we talked about this on the show with Sam Knight on the WeWork episode about SoftBank's Vision Fund, which is by and large funded by Saudi Arabia. And look at the havoc that piece of capital has caused. That $10 per barrel extraction cost is extremely competitive and allows Saudi Arabia to do all these weird, insane shit things that it does. So, of course, the U.S. needs to have an extremely cozy relationship with them. And it's symbiotic, too, right? We sell an enormous amount of arms to them. In case you're wondering, as I was thinking about this stuff, what is Venezuela's cost per barrel? It's around $28, so it's a little bit more price sensitive as a producer than other countries. So I'm gonna make everybody eat their vegetables right now, and I want to do a little Eat the Rich economics lesson, something that we need to know to like really understand how oil is used in our political economy. And so in economics, we talk about something called the price elasticity of demand, which is used to measure people's responsiveness to the change in the price of a good or service. That's why it's called the term elasticity, because it's like how much are people willing to stretch or swing one way or the other based on an increase or decrease of their demand of the good. So technically speaking, the equation of price elasticity demand equals the percent of change of the quantity demanded divided by the percent of change in price. So think about it. Depending on the size of the numerator or denominator, the equation can have a value greater or lesser than 1, right? Because they're both percentage points. If it's greater than or equal to 1, that means the good or service is elastic. If it's less than 1, that means the good is inelastic. So what about oil? Oil is price inelastic. People will buy it and use it regardless of changes in price. Why? Because oil can't be substituted easily. If the price of gas went up to $10 a gallon and you were like, you know, let me put something else in. Let me put fucking Four Loko in my tank. Like, this not, you can't do it. It has to be oil and gas. You don't have a choice as a member of our fossil fuel driven political economy. That's why it's inelastic. Try fucking calling up your boss and saying like, hey, boss, I can't come into work today. I'm feeling really price elastic and I don't feel like paying for this much for oil. You're dead. You're fired. Sorry. So just to set up this episode, just some background on what the stranglehold of the oil and gas industry has on our geopolitics.
Can I jump in really quick about something there? Because the other component to it that I think is not as apparent with, you know, when the price of oil and then gas like fluctuates as fuel, is it literally affects everything in the economy, because you're not just talking about like personal transportation, you're talking about like shipping. Most shipping is done in some manner, like in a way that consumes fuel. You're also talking about like the, you know, agribiz, like the entire agricultural production thing, with the exception of, you know, a very small amount of like local farms or whatever. It's all based not just in terms of even the shipping of goods, it's the actual production of the food. I mean, all of the food is sowed and harvested by fuel-driven machines that consume fossil fuels. The plants themselves require huge amounts of chemical fertilizer because they've been heavily dependent on that for like almost a century now. So when the price of oil fluctuates, it literally affects everything, and it's inescapable. It's not just a question of like even in the circumstance you're talking about, Dwight, like, oh, instead of, you know, taking my car, I'll ride my bike or whatever. It's like the cost of bread goes up, you know, literally everything increases.
Exactly. I mean, that's the stranglehold that the oil and gas industry has on our supply chain and our geopolitics, and specifically in America and mostly across the world too, our car-bound lifestyles. Like, think about it on the flip side though. Like, what would happen to the oil and gas industry's profit margins if government increased spending on public transportation,
right,
or subsidized electric vehicles or something?
I mean, there's a reason why, as well, on the more kind of directly political angle, that these companies have invested so heavily in lobbying, not just to protect, like, you know, the kind of meta interests that we think about in terms of, you know, again, geopolitical machinations, alliances, and those kinds of things that are beneficial to the oil companies, but also, like, you know, a great deal, particularly in the United States, of the entire like industrial infrastructure was built in the 50s and 60s as a kind of direct like result of, you know, car companies and oil companies like lobbying. I mean, like, think about like the whole concept of suburbia can only exist based on like cheap fuel. Like, that's the only way it can, because of the amount of like individual transportation that's involved. And there's a lot of, you know, again, a lot of the infrastructure of the country was literally built with these companies lobbying to have it be, you know, a very profitable infrastructure for them, which means that lots of people are consuming huge amounts of fuel.
Yeah, and if it just as a great illustration of this, you should take a look at the General Motors streetcar conspiracy, where basically a consortium of different car companies and car adjacent industries like Standard Oil, Firestone Tires, they got together and would buy up literal public transportation systems like in St. Louis, Los Angeles, Oakland, Baltimore, and they would do so and just shutter them because the long-term health of their industry would be antithetical to the existence of public transportation. How fucking insane is that?
I mean, it goes further as well. There's an interesting documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car that kind of talks about how the technology to have like a fully electric car did exist, you know, prior to the contemporary moment, but it was, again, similarly, like, you know, crushed by monopolies of, like, you know, the diesel-driven car industry as well as the gas industry. I mean, luckily now we have a hero like Elon Musk to reintroduce the electric car, and that's going to be one of the main things that help solve the climate crisis.
Kind of going back to what you were saying about the explicitly political nature of it, though, it's tough because it means that any political program that wants to address sustainability cannot focus exclusively on the sort of scientific component and the energy component of, like, you know, how do we actually sustainably produce energy and distribute it and that sort of thing. It has to also be very, very much ready to confront the oil industry as like almost like a political regime, if that makes any sense.
They literally have their own foreign policies.
Right.
So, yes.
So it has to be ready to just, it's not, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just swapping out one energy source for another, because the moment that you try and shift away from oil, you're kind of calling into question like a cornerstone of industrial society, and I guess post-industrial society as well. Like it's you know, it's a very foundational thing. And unfortunately, like we're talking about the suburbs and automobiles and stuff, so much of that has been designed around what oil is in a physical sense. And it's sort of like how it's stored, how it's transported, its energy density, all those sorts of specific things. And we can work around that in terms of replacing it, but it makes it much more challenging than it would be otherwise.
So look, I mean, the point of getting into the in-depth aspects of this is for you, the listener, to like understand these things, to know all of these things, because they're weaponizing it against us, right? They know how price elasticity works, and they weaponize that against us, and very effectively. So we need to be able to fire out some countermeasures against this, and we need to, we need to understand our enemy here. So speaking of understanding our enemy, Adam, I believe that you're pretty passionate about one specific gentleman in particular. Please illuminate us, regale us, Eat the Rich listeners.
Tell us about the Ham Man.
That's
Give us our holiday ham.
oh man, that's really good. Yes, so Harold Hamm just recently stepped down as CEO of a firm called Continental Resources, which is based in Oklahoma, which is where he is originally from. He is now an executive chairman as of, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but he's still a majority stakeholder, so he's still largely in charge in a lot of ways, we would say. But at his peak, he was worth somewhere around, I think, $18 billion. At the sort of peak of the post-financial crisis
Jesus.
oil price, when it was, what was it, like 90 or $100 for a little while there? He was worth that much. It's come down in the years since because his net worth is very much tied to the price of oil. So now he's only worth about $9 billion. So it's been a rough couple of years.
Loser.
Yeah.
Cut in half like a dog.
It's interesting you bring up Trump, though, Dwight, because he is kind of an informal advisor for President Trump. He's never taken an official position. He was considered, I think, for Secretary of Energy, but perhaps he looked at the Wikipedia page and saw that a lot of it was nothing to do with energy, that it actually involves nuclear technology and other stuff, so he didn't want to get involved in it. But
so we got fucking Rick Perry.
Right, exactly, who I think is still kind of figuring out what that job is about.
Yes.
He'll get it one day. Give him some
Right.
time. Give him some time.
But so he's not a cabinet member, but he does kind of advise the administration on various things. And he did speak at the 2016 Republican National Convention. But the thing with Harold Hamm is that he was kind of a key player in introducing fracking into North Dakota specifically. And so he and a few other key players were really kind of formative to this 2000s and 2010s fracking boom that's kind of reshaped a lot of the energy economy and a lot of like the United States' geopolitical position with regard to like energy development and stuff like that. 20 years ago, it would have been difficult to predict, I think, that the U.S. would be in the position that it's in now, which is it's basically, on any given day, it's probably number one in terms of oil production in the global economy. A couple of years ago, this would have seemed a very, very strange prediction. But Harold Hamm and a few others decided that it was worth the expense to try and explore a number of these shale formations out in the western U.S. His spot was North Dakota for whatever reason. But there were a bunch of formations that were known about for decades, but they were just considered too pricey, too risky to deal with, too labor intensive, too much of a pain in the ass, basically. And so what he did was he and a number of others decided to try combine two things. One was hydraulic fracturing, which you discussed, and then the other is horizontal drilling, which is usually used in combination with fracking. They often go hand in hand. I don't know if you can talk about horizontal. You might even be a better read on that than I am. But the idea is, conventional oil drilling it's vertical. You just drill straight down into the ground, and you're accessing reserves that are fairly close to the surface.
Yep.
Horizontal drilling is used when you've got oil reserves that are much further underground, and they might be located in between like a really impermeable rock. They're much more difficult to access. So what happens is they drill down into the earth about like a mile or two, and then they turn the drill like 90 degrees or so, and they drill horizontally for another mile or two, and then they start fracking. When you read about it, it's pretty sophisticated technology.
Very much so.
It's expensive, but at the time, what it did was it opened up just huge amounts of oil and natural gas that were previously considered just totally inaccessible. And as a result, we've seen a huge boom in oil production. And Harold Hamm was on the front lines of that, and so he made a shitload of money in a pretty quick amount of time. But it took him a while to get to that point, and we were discussing this earlier, but he actually started out, he's in his 70s now, and his family were sharecroppers down in Oakland. I mean, not Oakland, sorry. His family were sharecroppers down in Oklahoma.
Jesus.
And so he started out, he worked as a kid. If you ever listen to him give his speech at the 2016 RNC, for example, or when he's quoted in media and stuff, he will often refer to his kind of rags to riches story. And it was, as far as I can tell,
He spoke at the RNC in what year?
2016 for the Trump for the Trump campaign, yeah.
Motherfucker.
Yeah, it's a really bad speech. I can send you the link. That's awful. Yeah, there's a big chunk where he goes on about the relationship between drilling for oil and terrorism that is startling, I think, where he talks about how funding like green or renewable energy is actually a way of funding terrorism.
Every time we can't drill a well in America, terrorism is being funded.
Wow. Yeah.
It's like those old, like, you remember those, like, World War II posters about, like, rationing, where it's
Yeah.
like, and it's like a guy driving a car, and it's like every time you have an empty seat next to you in the car, you're driving, like, Hitler to work.
Oh,
Have you ever seen those?
No, I have not.
The idea
Yes.
being that, like, you're supposed to carpool to, like, save gas for the war
Wow.
effort, and so when you're not doing that, you're, like, helping the war effort. It's like the inverse of that.
It's
like
exactly the
every
mirror of
ti-
that.
Every time you carpool, you're literally carrying, like, ISIS terrorists around. If you have a kid who has a little league team, you buy each one of them their individual cars, and you drive a fleet of 20 vehicles, or ISIS is gonna retake fucking Raqqa.
I'm gonna read the quote, and then you can cut his actual audio in. But you're honestly short of the mark. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you.
Okay, yeah, please.
You're not
read the
even
quote.
as far as, because he goes even more. He says, every time we can't drill a well in America, terrorism is being funded. He says,
Orlando brought this home once again.
remember, this is 2016. This is July.
Orlando?
The
So he's
Orlando
talking
shooting,
about
yeah.
the Orlando mass shooting at Pulse.
Are you fucking kidding me?
I know. Yeah. So, it would have been about, what, a month earlier?
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Guns don't kill people. Not drilling for oil kills
That's right.
people.
Oh my
Like,
What
how,
the
how
fuck?
utterly insensitive and callous is that? You know what I mean?
Oh my god,
the
dude.
fuck?
That's so good.
Then he goes
That's
right into.
so good.
He says, it's been 15 years since 9/11. We can't ignore this problem any longer. I don't know what this problem is. But
What?
Actually, to give him some credit. On 9/10, there was like this like old Texas oil magnate, and he had like a cowboy hat. He's walking around the Texas oil fields, and he says, "You know what, boys? Shut off the wells. I'm feeling a little environmentalist today." The very next day, 19 hijackers stole precious planes and flew them into our beloved industrial trade centers.
again, man, I'm gonna I cut out like a sentence or two here, because the next thing he says is,
It's been 15 years since 9/11. We can't ignore this problem any longer. It's not going away. Climate change isn't our biggest problem. It's Islamic terrorism.
then he says again, like, your attempts at satire here are I hate to inform you of this, but they're coming up a little short.
Wow,
He says,
doesn't even touch it.
nope.
Oh my God.
He says every oil regulation puts American lives at risk,
That's true.
which
yeah,
is a
that's true.
stunning thing to say. Then he says,
Wow.
developing America's oil supply is a matter of national security.
Wait, hold on a second. Isn't like the oil industry one of the most dangerous jobs you
Yeah,
can
it's
take?
definitely.
So like literally those probably a good deal of those regulations have to deal with like safety things that are in place, and he's saying that that's costing American lives. Like the fact that like guys aren't just dying on exploding like unregulated like offshore oil platforms is what is causing death. That's
No, yeah,
amazing.
I think I don't remember the exact statistic, but the worker-related death rate among oil workers is something like 7 or 8 times the national average.
Sure.
Because it's extraordinarily dangerous work, especially in these areas where we've seen booms, like North Dakota and Texas and a couple of
Yes.
other states. The rush to develop has been so quick that they will kind of intentionally neglect safety precautions, because the idea is within about a year or two, most of the wells are sort of done. They're tapped out in terms of their major productive period. So if you can just sort of cook through the first year or two, it doesn't actually matter.
I don't know if you've seen, there's like pictures of America at night, but like from like, peak oil prices in like 2008 or something. And you look at it, it looks like most of North Dakota is like fucking New York and like
Yeah.
the tri-state area.
Exactly, yeah.
It's bizarre. And I remember somebody saying this a long time ago, saying like, if you want to find where oil is in North Dakota, just follow the U-Haul trucks, because people were just moving out there at like a rapid clip, getting their like signing bonus, buying a fucking F-250 and driving up there.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like 100,000 people ended up moving to North Dakota in the span of, I don't know, like maybe eight-ish years. That's a state that had about 600,000 people in it before that. So that's an enormous population increase. And a lot of it was because it timed right with the financial crisis, as you were saying, right? So it's the desperation there was very, very sincere. And so you had a lot of people who were going that way for opportunities, and they're going into work situations that are, uniquely dangerous.
Oh, don't blame the job creators.
Even for fucking Hamm here, when he was speaking in 2016, the fucking Deepwater Horizon disaster happened 6 years earlier. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it too, like, it shows you how bad of a job I'm going to use this term very fucking loosely, the opposition party played, how they talked about climate change. Because, like, this dude would just, like, and how Obama just like, the Paris Accord.
Obama loved fracking. He loved it.
Of course.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I mean, the entirety of the boom occurred under his watch.
That was one of the feathers in his cap was like the increase in oil production. That was like routinely positioned as a good thing. I remember just like anecdotally, thinking about, because this is like shit that I obsess over, and I realize it's not the kind of thing that most people like spend a great deal amount of time thinking about, right? I mean, that's in part because it's obfuscated, and in part just because people have like their regular lives and they don't really engage with this. And I remember
that's
I was
the eat the rich promise. That's
yeah. But like
you come here for.
I remember like probably around like 2013 or so, I was working at this job, and I had all these coworkers, and none of them were like political or particularly cognizant of like national or international occurrences and stuff. They had their own varied interests and things. But I remember there was like we got, for some reason at this place, we got like a subscription to like Wired, I think it was, and so we just have like Wired magazines in like the break area. And I remember this guy was like reading this like article in Wired and was just like, oil is going up, it's all good, and there were just like a bunch of graphs with lines going up. And I remember he turned to me and he was like, oh wow, like oil's going up, that's a good thing.
Jesus Christ.
And it was just like, but I mean, that's how, in a certain way, like that's how, like, again, it's so ubiquitous, but also I think so beyond like the fathomability of like most people, going about their day-to-day lives, that like it's just like these huge monumental things are occurring, and people like don't really have a grasp on what that means. Like at the bare minimum, not talking about like economics at all, but just like in the wake of like climate change, like more, even if it was cheap, easily abundant oil, like even if we magically found another well in Pennsylvania or Texas that all you had to do was like stick a straw in and oil was shooting out,
right? Burning
it is bad.
Yeah.
Like the whole point is that we have to stop doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. It would be tough to come up with like a worst case scenario that's worse than the fracking boom occurring when it did. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was such an opportunity for a kind of reinvestment or a first time investment in like other technologies and alternative energy sources and stuff around the financial crisis, because of that was the last time in our lifetimes that there was a major infrastructure push.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's not even fucking necessary.
No,
it's
it doesn't even make any fucking money.
Get
also,
places and do shit without having it. That's what's fucking mind blowing about it. It's that it's literally it serves no other fucking function than to make like fucking 35 people 17% richer on Earth.
That's literally exactly. There are very few people that make actual money off of it. Everybody else doesn't make shit. A lot of them go bankrupt. They lose their jobs, that sort of thing.
Need the fucking Tums.
Well, yeah, I mean, Adam, we've talked about this before, and I know you've written a bit about this, but in North Dakota, I mean, basically what happens is, please pick up on this, like, these fracking companies, again, being so short-sighted in a very small amount of time, they usually build both, this is like their PR, and then as well, like the way the media covers it is like, oh, wow, look, there's a great economic boom is happening, like all these people are showing up, all these people, have jobs now, like because the jobs usually pay a lot of money, and like you're saying, they're signing bonuses and stuff, it seems like, oh, the economy's doing well, like people are making money. And so, and in the course of 2 years, they just build all this like janky, broken fucking infrastructure that kills people. And then the second that the oil dries up, they just leave. And then you have this like huge infrastructure that cannot be supported by what was previously there. And it all just like fucking goes to rust, and it causes an equal depression in the community that was probably already like doing really badly.
Yeah, no, a lot of these areas in North Dakota where oil development happens most rapidly are areas that did not have a ton of, economic activity prior to that. They're really small towns in a lot of cases. And so the prospect of actual economic boom happening there is obviously like really exciting and interesting, because what are the other opportunities? If you're talking about towns that have maybe like a couple hundred or even a couple thousand people, the idea that you would bring a few hundred new jobs there through oil development it seems like, well, regardless of my sort of views on the environment or whatever, this seems like an opportunity that this family should take advantage of. It's so easy to see how somebody would find that to be
Don't they also end up importing people too? It's not like the people just move there. It's not like when they build, like, I mean, this is what I was thinking about when the prospect of like the new Amazon HQ was coming up in Queens, and they're oh, we're gonna build all these jobs. Like, no, you're not. You're gonna fly people from fucking Silicon Valley and ruin the community. No, the only way anybody locally there is gonna end up working is as like a fucking clerk or a security guard.
And
you're not gonna hire these people.
What also happens is, because Dwight, as you were talking about with oil pricing, right? Fracking is super dependent on really high oil prices. It's not profitable under a certain margin. So in a lot of cases, when the price of oil dips, they'll just start laying off people. A lot of these workers are technically contractors. They're not actual employees. They get paid hourly. So they'll just lay off tons of people, but because they'll have set up their infrastructure in such a way, they can actually maintain production levels sort of without that many workers. So you'll see a consistency of production output, but a total drop off in terms of actual economic activity in the region.
I guess if we want to look at the other side of the equation of the other input cost, that the price elasticity of demand for the labor that goes into this is extremely elastic.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Very much.
Because the increase and decrease of the quantity demanded is very much based on the denominator of the equation, which is the change of the price of the good that's sold. Right. So they can and with no worker protections and right to work and all this shit, they just fucking fire people, and then they're left, with kids back, a family back home from wherever they're from, a fucking $50,000 note on the F-250 that they bought, and no way to repay it back, and they're fucked, and they're just marginalized. They're just fucking cannon fodder for this insanely fucked up industry.
And in a lot of cases, that during that period in which they were actually making real money, the nature of the boom economy is such that real estate speculation has taken off, and so even if they're making considerable amount of money, they still can't afford to actually live in the place that they've just tried to move to. There was a period in I think maybe 2013 or so where real estate, per square foot real estate in Western North Dakota was as expensive as it is in Manhattan, which is and they were possible way, right? That can be a justifiable outcome, right?
And they set up fucking barracks there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, literally, they're called man camps. They're not even called barracks. Yeah,
man camps.
Yep,
man camps.
That's like a bad SNL joke.
Yeah, exactly. And this is all, again, as you mentioned, this is all so basically that somebody like Harold Hamm can make an extra however many % at the end of the year,
right,
and then sort of make his exit when he needs to. Because nobody else is benefiting, right?
So to that point, I have to bring this up because this is something that we mentioned in one of the recent episodes. I don't remember which, about indigenous people, and thinking about the population of Sioux people that inhabited North Dakota before fucking just complete genocide, and how none of the even at the minimum what the companies could do or what the state could assert on these fossil fuel companies is that there needs to be some sort of profit sharing like there is in Alaska, but they don't do that.
No,
of course not.
It's actually kind of even worse than what you're describing, because a lot of the fracking in North Dakota at least is on reservation land.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
I think it might be somewhere around a third. I'm not sure exactly, but as a result, the boom itself is super, super dependent on fossil fuel resources located on what is legally still technically, indigenous territory.
It's literally the plot of Wind River.
Yeah, no, actually, yeah. I mean, that's sort of what they're basing a chunk of that movie on. What's really fucked up about it is in the initial push for drilling rights and stuff like that, a lot of this land is privately held, whether that's on reservations or elsewhere. But, a lot of it might be people's ranches or their home lot or whatever it might be. And so oil companies, in order to drill on that land, they have to get mineral rights. And so they have to go out and offer people money for the right to drill on their land and then effectively ruin it for the next 10 generations. There's a really good piece in the publication High Country News about this. But they would oil companies would go to white communities in North Dakota and offer them X rate per, square foot or whatever it might be, or per acre for the right to drill on their land. Then they'd go over to the reservation and offer half or less of that amount.
Jesus Christ.
And
What the
the
fuck?
nature of the economy out there is such that a lot of these communities don't really have the means to turn down an offer like that, whatever the shitty number is, in both cases, because in both cases you're ruining land, right? But you would hope that at least there would be some measure of equal compensation for it, but that wasn't the case. And so they would literally offer just, a racially designated half of whatever they had offered a white community.
Like fucking literal mineral gentrification.
Yeah, it was really, it was definitely, it's a perpetuation of the colonial system, right? I mean, it's just a continuation of the same thing.
It's white supremacy.
Yeah, exactly. So we can see the relationship. It's for hundreds of years. It's just continuing into today, and as a result, it's been super destructive for a lot of communities out there.
On the topic of the destruction of land, because this is something that obviously it factors into a lot of the discussions around the fossil fuel industry and climate change, but very particularly in the case of fracking, it is just wholly destructive in a lot of different ways. I wanted to talk about this piece here, and I don't know if Adam, you probably are privy to this, but the whole thing with Hamm trying to get scientists fired.
Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah, and so in Oklahoma, right? Basically in the decade following the recession, when there was a growth of fracking, there was something like a 400-fold increase in the amount of earthquakes.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I believe it.
that was occurring in Oklahoma, and which is just fucking insane. That's just it's an unfathomably destructive number, right? Mm-hmm. And so at the University of Oklahoma, they had a number of I guess the faculty there, scientists and researchers were conducting a study to see if there was a link, which almost certainly there is, between the fucking development of these specific destructive and extractive techniques to get fracked gas and the increase in earthquakes. And Hamm apparently just fucking contacted the dean, because I guess he's a big guy in Oklahoma, and he was just fire them.
He's a donor, yeah.
What the
So yeah,
fuck?
Yeah, there you go. He's a donor to the school, of course.
Fuck.
So that's another way.
He's a philanthropist. That's
Right.
what he's
Yeah,
going to
exactly.
be listed on
Well,
his fucking Wikipedias. He's a philanthropist.
Though that's one of the things, right, about the way that these rich guys use their money, right, and use their position, because a lot of times they do, they will donate some pittance to, but it still represents a large amount of money for that particular institution or school or whatever it is, and that's it serves two PR needs. On the one hand, you could be like, look at me, I'm a philanthropist, I'm doing good things, I'm giving back to the community, and then of course you get an army of people on Twitter supporting them and being like, oh, you're mad because he's giving money to schools. I'm channeling a little bit of that.
I think
Bezos
Eat the
tweet.
Rich would know a lot about that based off of that
But
Amazon tweet.
you have that, but on the other hand, they're not doing it even for that pure PR purpose. They're doing it so that then they can wield control in these institutions.
they're peddling influence. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's basically like a lobbying cost.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I mean, and I'm sure in some fucking accountant who works for him or his company, that's included in profits and loss. That's
Right.
included in we're going to set aside X amount of money for our media push in order to suppress information about how what we're doing is fucking evil.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things is all it really takes is even the threat of something like that to kind of change the kind of academic environment or discourse around those things. So even just the idea that some of your school or your department's funding might be reliant on the whims of some billionaire, whatever, can have kind of really silencing effect on the kind of research that's being conducted. And I had read a paper a couple of years ago that was where this researcher had spoken to a bunch of academics out in the plains about the research they were doing. A lot of they do climate research, they do weather research and that kind of stuff. And a lot of them are saying there are certain topics that we would prefer not to discuss or to research into because there's always this threat that the oil industry is going to turn on you and make a target out of you. Even if they won't cut your funding explicitly, it'll still be a situation where they might blow you up on some media spot or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so then suddenly your entire
You'll be on Tucker Carlson tonight,
exactly, right.
being called the left wing communist
Yeah,
professor
exactly.
who dares to suggest that this company's policy of setting children on fire is a detriment to the community.
I mean, this is literally people were saying we don't want to do research into water quality because we're worried that if we bring up that fracking spoils
Unbelievable.
local water tables, we might get shit for it, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a hideous environment to try and operate in. You know what I mean?
There's that fucking
Plus the actual
tons.
threat of being fired is there as well.
Right.
Yeah. But so he's been, Hamm has been a key player in a lot of this stuff. He has a major lobbying arm in terms of his where he puts his finances and stuff. He I don't remember how much of his biography I got through, but he basically, like, you know, he started up after he realized some of these material gains. He started really using his money for stuff, and one of the things he lobbied for was he helped to get the repeal of the U.S. oil export ban going. I don't know if I'm phrasing that.
No, that's right. Because you were previously not allowed to export oil and sell oil from the United States.
Exactly. Yeah.
You as an extractor was unable to sell it.
Yeah. So in the 70s, this was
I'm sorry, but I just have to jump in here because this makes me so fucking mad. Because the other thing, like what I was talking about in that Wired article, or when you see like a headline that says like, "Oh, American oil production goes up," the way it's always pushed, right, and the way like you were saying that this guy put it at like the 2016, RNC is that like, oh, this is good for national security because this means like we're gonna be less. It's always put in this like autarky lens,
it's
right. We're gonna be less dependent on foreign oil. This is a good thing for the nation, but they're fucking selling it.
No, they are.
They're not even hoarding it.
No,
at least if you're gonna extract it from fucking the land, at the very least create like a reserve for the United States, so then that later, when like literally, all of the world is on fire, we have a little bit left to go down to the store and buy a nice ice cream cone. There's gonna be nothing.
There is actually the U.S. does keep a reserve. It's not as much as you would think. It's like maybe like, I don't know, 2 or 3 months worth. I think it's not a lot of oil. I mean, it's a lot in terms of
fucking stupid resource.
Yeah, exactly.
What a fucking stupid resource. It is so fucking dumb.
Yeah.
By the way, if it ever comes to the point where that reserve is tapped, like in an extreme crisis moment, guess who's going to have access to it? Not you. It's not going to be for everybody.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be whoever can pay for it, or whoever's in power, or the friends of power.
It would be principally the military, and then whoever can pick up the scraps after.
Yeah, exactly. It would be the military, and they would be fueling their tanks as they literally crush over, just like scores of protesters and stuff.
Yeah.
That's who's going to have the fucking control of the resource.
It's exactly what you're saying, though, in that the ban was introduced in the 70s, and people will get exemptions over the years for various reasons or whatever, but the idea was that after the oil shock of the 70s, like there was this paranoia around like, oh, if we're, we should make sure that we have enough of a stock, basically, that we make sure we're supporting ourselves rather than other people, whatever. And then the moment that oil production in the U.S. significantly increased, the first thing that they were worried about was, well, what is this ban doing to our profit capability here, right? And so they spent, right after Congress flips, they start spending a lot of money on lobbying to get the ban repealed. And in 2014 or 2015, it gets repealed. And basically it's had the effect that they hoped it would. They're exporting a lot more, and they're certainly, the U.S. is now a major producer and exporter of oil. Doesn't change the fact that the fracking industry is in and of itself a big fucking money pit, but it certainly is, the business leaders got what they wanted out of it.
I want to get into that in a second, because I think we've talked about this idea of like fracking being this not only just short term but just like just bad business as well,
stupid.
right? And this
stupid.
like this like thing for desperation. But just one last point about selling this offshore. It's not simply even that they're just selling. They can just sell it in order to like ship it out at the demand that they want to sell it at to get their profit. They have to build new infrastructure.
Yeah.
And new like fucking docks and oil offloading platforms and stuff, which again is a huge consumption of like labor, material, and natural resources, right? That is only going to be used for a short amount of time while they still have it.
Exactly.
It's so fucking short term.
It's
like why don't they just build a solar farm? It would cost the same amount of money.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because a major argument for a very long time around climate change and sort of what should be done about it was like, well, when it makes sense in the market, there'll be an investment into clean technology.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, the market will do it. Yeah.
And
I hate that shit.
Exactly, yeah. And the fracking boom is a great example of how backwards that has it. And we have now a market that is not making any money in the long term and is extraordinarily expensive, requires all this new fucking investment, and we would still
and
rather dump money.
subsidization.
Right, exactly.
And poisons the earth.
Right, yeah.
It's literally poison. It's poisoning the earth.
Yeah.
I don't think we can get away from talking about this without just bringing up the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, this hits on everything, because the point of the Dakota Access Pipeline was to transport oil and gas from the Bakken Shale Formation, which is what we're talking about. This is what Harold Hamm made his money on in western North Dakota. And, it was supposed to go through the Standing Rock Indian Reservation. And just saying what we were talking about before, Shane, like when you say, like, they're just going to use that oil to drive tanks over, like in a situation where things did become scarce, like there wouldn't be 300 injuries, there'd be 300 deaths of people that are protesting. They're just going to fire live ammunition on us.
I mean, the connection that we talked about earlier with the idea of like terrorism and oil being related does exist, but in the opposite way that this guy is saying it, because like one of the things that the Department of Homeland Security has done, for all the fanfare that's made very publicly, obviously, about the main target being Islamic terrorism and the kind of boomer conservative fixation on that, the DHS has classified it's one of its like biggest threats that it perceives in the next like several decades is eco-terrorism. And by that they classify like any protesters. Anybody who protests is considered an eco-terrorist, which also shows you again how the state and capital work together, because like the whole like fucking security apparatus of the state is going to be used to protect the interests of these fucking big ham men who are sucking the last bit of like dead dinosaurs out of the fucking ground in order to make a little bit more money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that whole experience with the pipeline, DAPL, really demonstrated that. I think maybe more immediately than even something like Occupy Wall Street. You know what I mean? It was so much more overt what was occurring, and the violence, at least if in my recollection, it was so much more brutal. You know what I mean?
And the argument from like people in the industry and shit was like, well, it's gonna get extracted anyway, and if it's gonna be transported like to Houston for further refining and shit, it's much safer to do it through a pipeline and much more economical than it would be to send it by train. Which, by the way, how many fucking towns were leveled from a train full of like crude just exploding as it's being transported?
Pipelines notoriously safe.
Right, yeah. That's right.
They are economical, but they will kill you.
Yeah.
At times like this, I'm thinking about, because we talked about how fracking is like, it's literally like a carrion operation, right? Because a lot of it involves like previously dead wells being like trying to be like brought back to life and stuff. And you think about like one of the reasons, in addition to the general gas crisis that the sort of anti-export law was passed in the 70s, is like in the 1970s, like oil production had peaked in the United States. And it started to decline after that, because basically we tapped all the easy to get to wells. We sucked up all the oil. Oil consumption went up exponentially every year. Like literally it would like double in like 5 years, every 5 years for basically during the mid-century. And then like, and now you can go, there are all these places in Texas comes to mind most easily, but where it's just like fucking empty fields filled with rusting infrastructure that it was just built and just abandoned when it stopped making money. And that's what I think about when I think about like a fucking pipeline like that. Like, again, just think about all of the resources, like the mining, the extraction. Oh, God, they're coming to get me. The ham man heard me. But like, the just the extraction of metals and the energy that's required to like compress the metal and all of that to build this fucking pipeline that will be in use for a certain amount of time, and then will just become a great monument to our waste. It's gonna be like the fucking aqueducts and shit that were in disrepair during the Dark Ages. In the next like fucking century, when we're all living like the feral child from The Road Warrior, like people will wander across the fucking wasteland and see these giant monuments to our excess and go, what was that? Oh, that was from the before time when we did this to the earth. Just to, kind of wrap up with finishing talking about Hamm, as we've already started, his role in the political economy and the other things related to fracking.
Yeah, so again, it's a lot of this stuff does come from either sympathetic or official sources, so I can't independently verify. But as far as I'm aware, he did come from, he did not come from a lot of money. He genuinely worked when he was young, and then he sort of worked in I think like as a mechanic or something like that, and he sort of gradually worked his way toward, he bought his first oil well, I think maybe in the late 60s, which is when he founded the company that would eventually eventually become Continental Resources. It was called something else initially. And then over the next couple decades, he just sort of gradually developed his business. He bought up another local, oil business and that sort of thing. And then by the late 90s into early 2000s, he had really sort of found a niche in the industry and then just exploited that to really extraordinary financial benefit. And as a result, people like Republicans and right-wing media will often like call upon him to speak to that idea of like opportunity and the idea of like, oh, actually you can bootstrap your way up and that sort of thing. Just patently absurd, obviously, but he's able to use it to like really good effect. And when he opens up his RNC 2016 RNC speech, which is I think a very boring speech, he does go through this whole like tells this story and everybody's cheering and shit because it is the kind of perfect case of what that side of the political spectrum is looking for when they want like a case study.
My first memories are picking cotton barefoot. I'm standing here tonight because the American dream was alive and well when I struck out on my own at 20 years old with nothing but a truck, a cosign note, and a phone. Thank God we have a clear choice today. Donald Trump and Mike Pence will restore the American dream for the next would-be visionary from small-town America. And they will make America great again. God bless America.
It's the American dream, man. It's the American dream.
So I think in a way, it's actually a very dangerous story because all you need to find is like one extremely exceptional case to then bolster your entire like ideology around, right?
Exactly. And they use it.
It's also a weird thing because like we were talking about in terms of like price elasticity. I mean, like oil is like drugs. You know what I mean? It's like there's always going to be the market for it. So it's not like he's an innovator.
No, right.
With the exception of obviously his innovation of the idea of like poisoning the earth to get more oil later on in his life. But it's not like he had some genius business idea, which is often the thing that goes hand in hand with this like bootstraps shit, right? Like, oh, I came up with a new product or whatever. It was literally just something that already existed that he was just extracting.
Right.
And he had the opportunity and the ability to do this at a time when like oil was fucking literally booming in the United States. Yeah. And every subsequent move he's made has just been tied to like this broader like increase in consumption of this product. It's not like, he was some like fucking Nostradamus-esque guy who was able to like foresee all of this happen. It was like just like written plainly.
Yeah, yeah.
He just happened to do it.
He was willing to invest the money to take the risk. There's a financial risk there, but he had the fucking money in the first place, and he knew that he was cushioned against any losses when he did it. So it's a capital begets capital sort of situation.
Exactly right.
Yeah, I mean I think like we've already talked about it a bit, but I did want to get into like the role of these guys in the political economy, right? Like guys like Hamm and others who use their outsized wealth that they get through this like dangerously extractive process, right? To then influence and lobby the government for, in his particular case, you look at like, again, the removal of restrictions in order to, sell oil offshore, or the removal of literal like safety regulations and things to make it so that you can do it quicker, faster, more dangerous, but at a faster rate of profit, because you don't have to put in, additional measures and additional infrastructure to make it safe or long lasting or sustainable. And again, when you're talking about a guy with the money on this scale, and you're talking about the fossil fuel industry and the way that we've gone over that it's so tied into like the very fabric of our industrial society. Like it's literally fucking oil is in everything. Oil's in fucking toothpaste. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like it's in the food you eat. It's in everything. So like to then leverage that position of power to literally do things that like poison the earth long term. And I'm not just talking about the effects of gas vis-a-vis climate change. I'm talking about these like destructive practices just in the case of fracking, right? Like what goes into that process. And when we talk about like late stage capitalism, right? Like I think most recently our friend Sam Knight was saying it's like an optimistic term, and it does sometimes have that feeling. But I think even if when we use this term, I think one of the helpful ways to think about it is like desperation, because the fossil fuel industry is a perfect example of this, but there are a number of them across all industries where basically capital has gotten to this desperate point of extraction. And, you know, when we were talking about, again, like the price elasticity of oil, right? And talking about like profit and loss and input output. I think in one of our very earliest episodes on Eat the Rich, when we were talking about like Chris Klein and the coal billionaires, and magnates, I brought up this concept about like, you know, like net energy output, which is, I mean, even if you strip away like the profit motive of it, energy extraction is all based on input output. How much energy do you have to put in order to get X amount of energy out? And at the turn of the 20th century, you know, oil was just like a fucking 1,000 to 1 energy input output, right? Like you could literally just strike the ground in any of these areas and like oil would just come shooting out, right? And, you know, we quickly capitalized on that. We extracted it as fast as we could. Every year, like I said, you know, oil consumption went up dramatically. I mean, particularly in the United States, but all across the industrial world. And then we used it all up. We used up all the cheap available oil. And that's why then we started going into things like offshore drilling. Now, in offshore drilling, you have to build a lot more infrastructure, and it's a lot more dangerous. And so you're talking about, you know, if fucking the stuff at the turn of the century was 1 to 1,000, now you're talking about like maybe 1 to 500, which is a pretty dramatic drop off. I mean, you're still making a good amount of profit, but, you know, it's significantly less in terms of like all of the upfront investment and infrastructure you have to build, right? And then when we talk about fracking, right? Again, we talk about like how you have to do all these additional processes. You have to like reuse old material. You have to build new infrastructure around it. And ultimately, the quality of the gas and stuff you're getting is like fucked up, and you have to process it and refine it in a lot of different ways because it's not the cheap, easy, abundant crude that existed in these giant wells. And so in order to do it as well, you have to like, you know, cause like massive earthquakes. You have to, as we've talked about, or I've screamed a number of times on this program, you have to literally poison the earth, or as you brought up at the very beginning, Adam, you have to like suck all of this water, right? Which in a lot of places is a precious natural resource that there isn't just like an unlimited amount. And you have to do all of this to extract something that has that tight of a profit margin that you brought up, Dwight, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're doing that, that is not the sign of like this endless, boundless growth.
Nope.
That is literally like a last gasp. Right? That like there is not going to be after fracking a new way to extract any of this oil, right? And this is already at such a tight margin, which then begs the question of like, why are they doing it? Why are you expending, you know, with frack gas, you're talking about, you go from like 1 to 1,000, 1 to 500 to maybe like 1 to 10, maybe, in terms of the amount of energy that it's required to put into it to get that out. And at a certain point, that's just going to come sputtering to a halt. And we already know that that was the case. I mean, as we talked about, you know, the fucking recession would have been a great time to like reevaluate our entire, you know, energy sector and try to start building or working towards something more sustainable. You know, now it's probably too late to do that, to avert some of the really awful consequences of climate change. I mean, it's not to say we shouldn't still do it, but the fact that you're at this last stage of desperation is, for me, what I think about when we use the term like late stage capitalism, right? Which shows that it's just an utter desperation, and it's very close to the point where it won't be profitable anymore. And when that happens, if you have no alternative investment, right? Like, and there's no short-term incentive, right, to do any of this investment, right? You're gonna result in like huge amounts of like poisoned land.
Yep.
A great drop off in either, you know, like the extraction of fresh water, or just again the poisoning of fresh water, which is something we haven't even gotten into, but happens in a lot of the communities where fracking is a big thing. And then on top of that, you're going to be faced with end of oil, or certainly a dramatic reduction in the amount of oil that's available to use, and the effects of climate change on top of that. All of these things coming from this one sort of like system of extraction that we've been doing for about 150 years, which is coming to an end one way or another. And I think one of the scary things to reckon with, and this might be slightly controversial, and we might get, I don't know if you want to like cut this or whatever.
Fucking do it.
But like, I think that, you know, all of this is predicated on this infinite growth model. Like, we can keep growing, we can keep growing, we can keep growing. And it's so baked in, and it's tied to this like nebulous idea of progress that is really this like enlightenment idea that like things will just keep getting better and bigger, and, you know, there'll be more of everything. And like, at a certain point, that's just simply not going to be true. And I think that idea has also been internalized to a certain extent within the left. Like, I mean, obviously the right is going to think this shit and they're crazy and the liberals don't like care or whatever. They're just trying to like, keep the ship of state sailing smoothly or whatever through the fucking cracked ice and melting ice caps or whatever. But like, even on the left, I think that there's sometimes this optimistic hope that like we're going to, quickly, as soon as we adopt socialism or whatever, or adopt this like social democratic thing, we're going to get into this place of like post-scarcity, or this belief that like, if we do something, if we do this big sustainability project, like something like a Green New Deal, that like we can replace our energy consumption of fossil fuels with an equal amount of sustainable energy. And the reality is like we can't.
Yep.
And this is not to
They
say
don't
that
work
like
the same way, right?
Yeah, like it's not to say like we shouldn't do the sustainability projects, but like part of that is going to be, and of course it's like political suicide to admit this, but at a certain point it's going to be fact whether or not it's political suicide to just be like, next year we have to use less energy than we did this year, and we're gonna have to do that every year for about 100 years. Like that's just going to be what happens. And so the smart way to do it would be to taper off with the last amount of fossil fuels that we have, right, as we kind of build into this, so it'll be easy, or it'll be just one day like the pump don't work, and everybody's fucked. And so it's a scary prospect, but I really do think like that's how fucked we are. And again, that tapering process is continually being fought against by people like the Hamm man, because they're looking at their fucking like quarterly, reports, being like, did we make more money this quarter or not?
That's it. That's literally, and Shane, you said this in one of the first episodes of Eat the Rich, but like that's literally as far as capitalism sees is to the next quarterly report. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's interesting when you talk about this, the idea of progress and stuff and how it's been adopted sort of like unilaterally across the political spectrum, which I would agree with. And I think it's like a super loaded term, unfortunately. Like progress is like an actual, noun or whatever. If I can be so bold as to quote Murray Bookchin, who is a bit of a controversial figure, but he has this idea. He was talking back in, I think, the 70s, and he has this idea called futurism. And he argues that futurism is this idea where the future is basically the exact same thing as the present, but just like more of it. And that's where a lot of our political projects tend to focus on. So like it's higher skyscrapers, it's faster cars, maybe they fly or whatever the fuck. He's, it's 1970 whatever. So he's sort of he's giving a speech and he's intentionally being a little bit, over exaggerated about it. But I think that's a real risk that we have, is focusing on swapping out oil for a sustainable resource and then trying to just look at progress in that very linear way. You know what I mean? Where like, it's more and more of the stuff that we have now, which is that now we're charging it electrically rather than with natural gas or with whatever. But the alternative is to look at it and say like, well, what are the other measures of progress that we have? What are other ways to, make people live fuller, better lives, right? If you can decrease the work week, if you can regreen a city, you know what I mean? If you can decrease the amount of time you spend away from the people you care about, and away from your own, like if you can cut down on your commute, you know what I mean? All those sorts of things. If we can increase healthcare spending and all that sort of stuff, we can increase education. Like those are all things that would not really appear in a more linear kind of modern conception of what progress is, because they aren't technologically focused, right? No. And they don't look at expanding sort of development in a really strict sense. But they would all, I think, for most people, dramatically improve their quality of life. Whereas building a new skyscraper, like Hudson Yards or whatever, it's not really doing much for most people. You know what I mean? Like it's not fucking.
I hate that shit.
And so that's sort of, I think that's like the sort of Musk brand of futurism, which a lot of liberals
build tunnels.
Yeah, like
turn the fracking wells into underground tunnels.
The entire, what a dumbass. What a fucking moron.
But it does kind of, I think, underlie a lot of our assumptions about our political projects. Is like, well, first thing we got to do is replace the car fleet with electric cars, and it's like that's not actually going to fucking help. And it certainly will reduce emissions, but
well, the thing that's frustrating about that is like, of course, like you'll remove like the exhaust that comes out of all those like individual vehicles, but like how's the electricity generated?
Yeah,
they generate it by burning oil.
You still
like that's how.
And where are you getting your lithium from? Where are you getting cobalt from? Where are you getting these resources from?
Yeah.
Right-wing coups in Bolivia.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. As a result, I think this is an opportunity. Kind of like going back to what you were talking about in terms of like, let's think about the real actual transaction occurring where you're using a scarce resource, water, to extract something that is actually polluting us for a short-term benefit.
Fucking stupid.
Fracking does, in a weird way, offer us a really good opportunity to just totally rethink our sense of like political ecology. and be like, well, no, do we actually even want to use resources in that way to get this thing? Or do we want to rethink what it means to, like, you know, use energy and that kind of stuff? Which gets very abstract, I suppose, but I think it's necessary.
Wrong. Wrong.
I mean, I think that, you know, the thing that we would agree on here, Adam, right, is that in this reevaluation of, like, how we look at progress and what it means, right, like, in order to accomplish, like, what we would see as real progress, like these leftist ideas, like, what we're going to need is, like, a single powerful state entity that is highly centralized, that is able to accomplish and distribute these things and manage the rationing that will probably end up occurring in this transitionary moment. I'm glad that you agree with me about the necessity for a strong state.
That was, yeah, I think in most, the thing we could also agree on is that usually looks like, it's like a long train with a series of cars. The train is called Snowpiercer. No. No, but I mean, to your point, like, these do end up getting us thinking about, like, really, really, like, fundamental questions of, like, politics in ways that I think liberals have been trying to avoid for a very long time. Because the idea is, like, it's not industry shit. We figured it out. We know, like, you know, this sort of model of republicanism or whatever is the way to do it, and whatever. But clearly it has its limitations.
I mean, I think that, like, you know, I was recently rereading this for a piece I was working on, but it goes back to the that idea that Mark Fisher brings up, or rather, you know, he sort of cites himself in his thing, Capitalist Realism, when he talks about, like, the idea that, you know, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. And I think part of that is, like, you know, we can think about what it'll look like, or, you know, what actions we need to take to move away from a purely capitalist, you know, social structure. But even beyond that, especially when we're talking about, like, energy consumption and energy resources, like, the world is, one way or another, going to fundamentally look different.
Yeah, necessarily. Yeah.
In 100 years.
Correct.
Just absolutely. Like, both in terms of, as I described, like, the topography of the earth is probably going to be very different.
Literally.
The political changes are going to be different. But, like, also the entire way our society works. And that's why, I mean, I think that's one of the attractive appeals of the left, is at least within leftist spaces, you have, like, some imagination about what that's going to be. I mean, a lot of the times, you know, we have disagreements, people argue all the time, and we love a good inner left fight, don't we, folks? But, like, you know, there are people like Adam who suggest that we need this giant state apparatus. There are people like me who are far more reasonable. But, like, for those who are listening, Adam does not. I think that's pretty clear. But, you know, I think that at least we have some conception of what that future is going to look like, right? And I think the alternatives to that are, you have the liberal technocratic view, which is just like nothing. It's just like you said, like, it'll just be this, but more of it, or whatever.
Right.
And that's just, like, fundamentally, like, that will not hold. And then, unfortunately, one of the more popular and emergent variants of this look on the future on the right is just, like, a totally nihilistic fucking return to fascism, in the sense of, like, as these resources become more limited, as we have difficulties in managing and distributing what little is left, we should just become like a fucking fortress state. Build giant walls, you know, militarize police,
fucking
and
stupid.
just, like, arrest anybody who tries to enter the country, or, you know, create a degree of social relation among people of just, like, deep cynicism and irony, and, like, a total detachment and lack of empathy for other people.
They don't even know that they're going to be the ones that are going to show up to the fucking pump one day, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, of course.
And then they're going to be like, dude, I didn't fucking know.
I mean, I think, like, if we the real thing is, like, if we don't engage in some kind of mass political change, right? And I don't just mean in this country. I mean, like, collectively across the world. Like, it has to happen in a number of places. What the future will probably look like is a more hyper, like, dystopian version of what we have now, where you have these, like, small enclaves of incredibly rich people living in, you know, like, pleasure domes,
Hudson Yards.
Right. You know, yeah, and then just outside of that, everybody else is, like, fucking starving and dead. So, Happy New Year. Looking forward to the future.
Well, yeah,
and
but
what
that's,
it will bring
I
for
think,
all of us.
And it's like, to your point, again, I think that the progress stuff and the just developmentalist mindset is really key to consider with this, is that I think there's a real opportunity to redefine on the left what that means. And we can like re-embrace definitions of what it actually means to improve quality of life that aren't totally linked to, increasing energy consumption. That often sounds like austerity because we've been convinced that if we're decreasing expenditures in some way or another that we're fucking people over. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? You know what I mean?
Right,
There's so much that can be done to improve our social relationships just by like bringing people closer together and then working from a community out there, rather than insisting that like the suburbs as they currently exist are the only way that a society can continue to perpetuate itself. You know what I mean? There's so much about the way that we've developed this thing that is deeply unsustainable, and like, it separates people, and those are things that can be really part of a really robust, like an ambitious political project that aren't tied to just being like, we're going to build the most impressive electric car of all time. It's like, I don't know, that's not going to really do it, I don't think.
So what you're suggesting is we have some kind of central authority that is able to go into the suburbs and forcibly remove people and put them into big dirty cities. Is that what you're saying?
No comment. No, but I think you were talking like, if we don't do anything, it'll just become a much shittier, more horrifying version of what it is. I would not disagree, but I would say that what's interesting to think about is like in the interim, as things get more difficult, like some of the responses we're going to see from people who oppose that might seem more and more shocking. But we should anticipate that the political playing field is going to be very different over the next couple of decades as people respond to the situation that is developing, like I think much more rapidly than anybody anticipated even a decade or two ago.
Correct.
A lot of times people talk about mass political movements and they talk about their limitations and stuff and civil disobedience and that sort of stuff. The rules around that might change very quickly in certain parts of the world as people realize that the situation's not changing, but they can feel that their actual livelihood is changing. I was reading a book earlier this year called Climate Leviathan, and these theorists are sort of talking about what they think the future political possibilities look like. And one of them that they identify is like, insurrectionary Maoist movements. And their point is like, we might not approve of this or condone it, but people in certain circumstances, in the manufacturing belt of the world, for example, might say, wow, like this is the most viable form of political resistance that we have available to us. I think certainly, as you're saying, 100 years from now, the political landscape and the physical landscape are going to be dramatically different. And trying to insist otherwise is really not going to help anybody.
I want to live that long.
Not me, man. No way. Give me a good, solid go at it, and
plug me into one of these fucking smart cars, and I'll just transfer my personality into like a Tesla Cybertruck, and then I could be like, Inspector Gadget's buddy or whatever. And I can live to see the collapse of industrial society. It would be really nice for me.
This is like a good sci-fi plot. Like all of us upload our shit onto some sort of database, and then we shoot it out into space. And then our world... Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. This is just the plot of the first chunk of Man of Steel. That's what happened. I just realized. Krypton does this. Russell Crowe puts his shit onto a little like a USB stick, and he sends it off with his baby Kal-El. And then that way, 25 years later, Henry Cavill can like open up the USB stick and talk to his dad as like a Force ghost kind of thing. Because their planet in the movie is rupturing, yeah.
You're thinking the plot of Frequency?
I could
which
be.
Was
I haven't seen Frequency.
A solar flare allowed for Dennis Quaid to talk to his son, and he died in a fire.
Or was it his dad? Wasn't it his dad?
No, hang on. You're thinking of the movie Contact, which is the aliens use the dad form to make contact with Jodie Foster's character.
Right. Yeah. I changed my mind. I don't want to live that long. I don't want to find out about all the awful movies that'll be out,
I mean, I will say, to their credit, 9 Star Wars movies, none of them made an eco-terrorist the villain. So that's sort of... Or no, wait, did they?
No. First of all, the villains of the Star Wars story are clearly the fucking rebels, okay? The true heroes are the strong, central, Jacobin-like state of Palpatine and Vader, okay? And they are like enforcing, a sort of secular state. They got rid of this fucking ridiculous Jedi nonsense, okay? I mean, think about it, right? Palpatine and Danton. Danton sees power in the insurrectionary commune. Palpatine sees power in the Sith insurrection against the Galactic Republic. Both very ugly. There's a lot of similarities here.
That's exactly right. Other than most of it being wrong, it's 100% 100% right. That's like a
Thank you. That's the podcast brand right there.
Obviously, I miss Chris dearly, and I wish that he was able to join us on this fucking hellscape of an episode that we've learned about. But just on some kind of like the reflections of the past year, I think it's important at this time of year to think about, what happened in the previous year and what lessons have we learned. Something that I like to say, which is like mistakes can either be turned into regrets or lessons. And obviously it's a better thing to do to turn it into a lesson because nobody wants to know fucking ragrats. In reflection on the past year, I think it's important, especially for like the three of us, for Shane and Chris and I thought it was pretty cool that we found each other through some insane serendipity in finding kind of an online space for people that are of like mind and want to try to organize and maybe don't have the community at their fingertips where they are physically. And for what we do with Eat the Rich is kind of to try to help broaden a space that I think the people are looking for. And obviously no exception with this episode. It's a podcast that can be a bit hazardous to your fucking blood pressure because this shit is infuriating. But those of you that are Eat the Rich listeners are now part of a community of solidarity, and we're fighting against the ruling class, the ownership class, against capital, against climate change, against fascism. And kind of reflecting on it, the point of what we're trying to do with this show is, the hope is for you to know your enemy and to put all these arrows of information in your quiver so that when you go out to your individual spaces, maybe spaces in communities that aren't left-leaning, that you know what to do when somebody confronts you and says something like, well, if you want to get ahead, you need to work hard. Bullshit. That's bullshit. Why? Because that's not how an economy works. That's not how this economy works. This economy works by the ownership class, aka people with capital, paying those without capital for their labor as little as possible in order to increase their profit margins and buy more ways to keep it and keep the working class down, right? That's something that we've learned, right, from this whole process. And I hope that, you are having these hard conversations with your parents or your siblings or your friends and in your community to call them in, preferably, or because it tends to have better results, or call them out and reinforce those things that, like, marginalization of people of color, of our LGBTQ comrades, of our indigenous brothers and sisters. Those are the communities that we need to make sure that we're defending as part of the same struggle. Because anybody that uses like fucking slurs against somebody that isn't themselves, they have been successfully brainwashed by the ownership class to think that there is some difference between these like aesthetic differences between us, rather than the empowering realization, which I think we're all kind of like coming to a collective understanding of, which is there is no war but class war.
I also wanted to say, I mean, I did a little post about this during the holidays, but a sincere thanks to everybody who's been listening to the show. I really think that, I know for myself certainly, and I believe this goes for our co-hosts, that if we hadn't have received such a positive response to this, we probably would not have kept doing it and kept putting in the work to produce it, because it's deeply encouraging to see people are enjoying the program and reaching out and talking about it and stuff. So really big thanks. And, I think part of that response too has led us to, get some other things in the works that hopefully we can go over in a little bit more detail when they start to form in the next month or so.
Hell yeah. Big suspense cliffhanger right there.
Yeah, there we go.
Nice.
Adam, what are your reflections about our cool podcast?
Speaking as Chris. No, I'm kidding. It's been super exciting to watch you guys develop this over the past however many months it is. It's been really cool to see it like flourish as it has already, and I'm very grateful to have been a part of this episode. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for helping to demoralize the listeners as much as we try to do to them every week. No, it's really cool.
Any last words? Anything you want to plug?
I mean, if you're looking for somebody to write about any of these issues, my DMs are open. Feel free to invoice me.
Seriously, please, if you get a chance, check out any of Adam's writings.
Thank you.
It's really, he's a really great
man.
writer,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to see that he's been getting stuff out there regularly.
Thank you.
And check him out. Is on Twitter. It's at Ambinate, which is at AMBINATE.
Get ready for a horde of weird people.
Oh yeah, buddy. You don't want none of this.
Every tweet you make is going to be filled with people repeating the same 4 fucking memes over and over again.
That'll be different than my DMs then, which are the exact same. No, I'm kidding.
You know what I think is really funny to the listeners of the show? The good morning thing. I think it's hilarious. And I think
Shane
that
loves
every
it.
time I post in the morning, you should respond to my tweet by saying GM, because it's really funny and inventive
Shane
and
loves
new.
it.
I fucking love it.
I've been impressed
Oh,
by
yeah,
how
but-
long that's sustained. I thought you would have kind of nipped it at some point with your vociferous attacks, but no, people are really pushing.
Yeah, well.
On another note to that point, definitely do keep every time that Michael Bloomberg tweets.
Oh, yeah,
sending the
we're still
picture.
on Bloomberg.
Yes,
Yeah.
please keep sending the picture of him and Ghislaine Maxwell.
The war on Christmas is fake. The war on Bloomberg is real. Bad man. He's a bad man.
Stay cool, folks.
Stay cool.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Oh, yeah, Happy New Year. Let all
Acquaintance
I'm not going to sing
be
it. Fuck it.
forgot.
Just end the episode. End the episode.
Cut
Cut it. Bleep him. Bleep him.
Stay cool, folks.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot